And now for the first of three South American miners for you, AIM and TSXV listed Orosur Mining's CEO Brad George joins us from Perth, Australia. OMI released a Columbia update this morning which referenced exploration activities at the company's flagship Anza project and included a very positive assay result from Pepas of 150 meters at 3 ounces of gold. This one will go down in Orosur mining history, I think. And this from the first drill in a previously untouched area. Good judgment or good luck? We have Brad, it certainly sent the OMI shares up almost 40% today, which is an extraordinary day on the stock market. But importantly, the release also mentions that Agnico Newmont may elect to enter into phase 2 of the JV agreement. So those are two things that we really want to know more about. And here's Brad joining us live from Perth, Australia in the middle of the night. Okay, over to you, Brad.
All right, let me just turn this thing on. So, sorry. Okay, thanks, Donald. Obviously, it's been a fairly busy day, so I do apologise that it's been a long time coming, but I would like to think that it was worth the wait. This obviously, this share price graph doesn't really reflect the last or today's movements, but we'll update next week. The main takeaway on this screen, you've all seen it before, is that the warranty, 11 million warrants, they were all related to a capital raising or just shy of 2 years ago. So they will all, unless the share price goes to about 24, 25p, and we all have our fingers crossed, they will expire in November this year and fall away. So our diluted share capital will come back to again to a very low level. I'm going to only talk about Anza tonight. We have three primary projects, or Anza being the most important project in Colombia. The other projects are early stage. In Argentina, we've come off. We're at the end now of the winter recess. So I'll mention them in passing, but I'll talk about them in more detail in later presentations. I think obviously Anza is the primary focus of attention today, so we'll deal with that. Purely South American focus, strong balance sheet, something of the order of 3.2 million in the bank at the moment. And importantly, the Colombian project is under the operation of, I think at the moment today, is the world's largest and third largest gold miner. So it's nice to have friends with deep pockets, particularly in rugged terrain of Colombia. So having those companies there looking at the Anza project not only is testament to the potential of the project, but in terms of the financial ability to work this project, this is really the sort of project that you need big companies. It's hard for a small company to operate in this kind of terrain. Just running through quickly, the Ariquemes tin project, it's been talked about previously. A very large land holding of just shy of 3,000 square kilometres in western Brazil in the Rondônia tin province. We are working on a JV there with Toronto-listed Meridian Mining. A very large and very historical tin province in western Brazil, but mostly historically have been mined by artisanals, local garimpeiros, so very, very undercapitalised, underexplored, underexploited. So we've secured a major land position there. We've done some preliminary work and we have sampling programs beginning in the next couple of weeks. So that's one to watch. At the moment, it's only just beginning, so we'll wait and see. The other one, as I mentioned, was an exploration project in southern Argentina, El Pantano. The Deseado Massif region in Patagonia is a very established gold province. Some major mines down there with Anglo and Barrick, and the majors are down there. A very low cost place to explore. Nice open country. That's a nice change from Colombia. A greenfields project. We've done some work there beginning of this year with some geochemical sampling, gave very positive results for the first phase. We're now getting to the point where we're about to start some ground mag surveys in the next couple of weeks post the winter recess. So early stage, but again, a large land holding, very prospective ground, and a nice sort of addition to what we're doing in Colombia. But of course, you've all come to hear about Anza, so I won't disappoint you. I'm not entirely sure what the audience is. We may have some new entrants here today, so I may just go back briefly and explain the history, because it's been a long time coming. It's been 10 years, if you like, to be an overnight success. So, well, the project really was actually part of, going back over 10 years ago, was part of Continental Gold that used to own the Buritica deposit just north of us, which was bought out by Zijin Mining for about $1 billion a couple of years ago. Before it all became very exciting, Continental decided they couldn't run both projects and had to make a choice between this and Buritica, chose Buritica, and Anza was spun out to a Canadian company, Waymar Resources. Waymar stuffed around for a bit, did some nice drilling at the Central Aptar prospect, got some nice results, but really didn't, for whatever reason, show much enthusiasm, leading us to merge with them in late 2014. We then drilled, but that's when Orosur began to suffer financially with the inevitable decline of its Uruguayan mining operations. And the project went into abeyance for a couple of years, which ultimately led to the joint venture with Newmont in late 2018. That, among other things, was a $2 million equity injection to the company, which made them, and as they still are today, our largest shareholder. But then almost immediately after that was signed, there were some security issues in Colombia, which meant that Newmont basically closed the country down. So no work was done for a couple of years. Then again, leading to Agnico joining in late 2020 and forming a JV with Agnico, or with Newmont, to run the project, with work commencing in late 2020, smack in the middle of a global pandemic. So the last 18 months, I suppose, or last 2 years, most work had been focused at that Central Aptar project or prospect, drilling it out, working within a COVID bubble, which sadly prevented us really from going too far up and down strike. But that began to relax end of last year, and we were able to identify and work out prospects that led eventually to drilling commencing at Pepas in April of this year, with results, of course, coming today. Geologically, we're in the Mid-Cauca Belt, which is northwest of Colombia, just to the east of the Andes Mountains. It's a major late Miocene belt of rocks. Late Miocene being quite young, sort of 5 to 30 million years, more or less. Major north-south structural corridor of intrusives and some volcanics and sediments and a whole range of packages. Major structural corridor. And a major region of porphyries that are coming up. So all of the large gold projects that we find in Colombia are in this belt. They're all porphyry related, that the porphyries are the heat sources, the metal sources. So it's either the porphyries themselves or it's the epithermal deposits above the porphyries that we're looking at. But all of the major projects, gold projects, are in this belt. So we are in the right part of the world. Quite a good land package. We've got a number of granted licenses and applications totaling about 200 square kilometres. All the work to this point has been done, all the drilling at least, been done on the granted titles, the ones in green. The two large red areas are the applications. We have been able to work on those in a non-disturbing way with sampling and some trenching, but we can't drill. So they've been kept as applications for many years, partly as a way to reduce cost, because applications have no annual fees, but largely due to the difficulty in moving those forward to the granting stage due to some environmental permits and some slightly changing situation in Colombia. Those are all now largely resolved. We have been working through the application granting process over the last few months, and we're having our public audiences with the local towns and communities in the next 2 weeks, I would hope. So all going well, I would hope those will be granted probably or later in the year, but certainly once the audiences are done, then it's largely just a rubber stamping process and it goes through the system in a couple of months' time. Having said that, as part of that process, these applications will reduce slightly in size. We've made some concessions to remove areas of environmental permits and to try as much as we can to only work in the municipalities that are quite pro-mining. So the we cover 4 municipalities. Not all of them are as friendly as they can be. So we're removing a few areas that we feel that are not geologically significant and fall into areas where approvals might be difficult. So we want to focus on the main rocks and the main areas where we have a very good name. Just to annoy you all, our JV partners in their wisdom have decided to change all the prospect names. Those of you who have known and loved the previous names, I'm sorry, it's all changing. So the rationale here was largely to remove any geographical references to the prospect names as a measure, I guess, to not give away too much information about locations and so potentially attract artisanal miners. You might note, for example, that in the last few announcements there have been no maps. That was intentionally done at the request of Agnico and Newmont, so as not to provide information to attract the people we don't want on the prospect. So, and where there are maps, you also see here there are no coordinates. So we are just trying to keep things a little bit quiet. Pepas and Pepino are new. La Sasita is now becoming La Virgencita. Jesuitas has gone altogether and becomes part of Aptar North. Charascala becomes El Roble and Guamarala becomes El Cedro. So there will be an exam on that afterwards, but that was done for the right reasons, and there'll be, I guess, a small moment of confusion, but I'm sure you'll all adapt. Aptar, for those who followed the story for quite some time, has been the main focus of almost the entire focus of drilling since the project began many years ago. This was largely due to access. There was an old gypsum mine here, so there were pre-existing tracks. There was known gold mineralisation, so this was the easiest place to go. So during Weimar and our early days, this was the place to drill. And we got very good hits. The best, for example, was roughly 60 metres at 10 grams. So it wasn't a place that we could really walk away from. It's a higher level epithermal system, so it's probably a hybrid VMS epithermal system. Very good numbers, but the more we drill, the more we realise that while it's attractive, while there's probably a deposit there, it is structurally complicated, and therefore moving that to a resource is going to require quite a lot of drilling that our joint venture partners felt was better spent running along strike and testing new targets. Bigger companies have different ideas, different priorities, and these guys are not here for Aptar, they're here for 10 Aptars. So they needed to find the next ones. And so the Aptar has been put on the shelf for a while. We'll come back, but at the moment, the main focus is finding more of these or finding more of different things. And so once new prospects and targets were defined along strike, drilling has accordingly moved along strike. So bringing it to Pepas, this is the northernmost prospect in the whole project area. It's roughly 12 kilometres north or east of Aptar against the northern boundary. We really came here because this is where the work started. Once the COVID problem began to abate, we were able to get out our field crews and do mapping and sampling, beginning in the north and working to the south. So really it's just an orderly sequence of working our way down. A number of holes were planned here over roughly a kilometre of, I won't call it strike, but a kilometre of area, targeting a range of different targets. So we've got some geochemical targets, some geophysical targets, just some nice structural targets. So a range of holes were planned. Drilling here is complicated. This is quite rugged terrain, so putting in drill pads is a fairly scary exercise. We need permits. We need to walk in by, well, I say they need to go in on foot and dig these pads by hand and move rigs in by hand or helicopters. So it's a sort of thing you have to plan well in advance. And then when you want to change, it's not easy to change. So the plan was drill a range of holes early on, assess the targets, and then once we had a view of which ones were the most potential, then come back and refocus. But of course, then, as we saw today, PEP1 came back with some very interesting results, which had everyone very excited and required almost immediately a pivot in the drilling plan. And I'll talk about the next slide. But pivoting is not easy here. So the first couple of holes were drilled. The northern holes were drilled. So we'll probably see, we've not seen the results for northern holes. They may or may not be as exciting, probably not. So we're probably going to see a phase of the next couple of holes from the north being interesting. But until we come back to the current holes that are being drilled back in the original target, I think we've got a few weeks or months of just getting those holes coming into the target from better angles. The section itself, very simple because we only have one hole. It's far too early to really understand what we've got. And geologists are a bit like economists, they never agree, and there's 10 geos and 15 different opinions as to what this is. It's not a porphyry, it's from a porphyry. So it's a hydrothermal breccia system, which is basically broken rock full of quartz. So it's something that's squirted out from a porphyry. It's probably quite deep, so probably deeper in the system than we saw at Aptar. Shot through with stockwork veins, mineralized from surface. There are high-grade veins in there of 10, 20 grams, but that's what's more attractive to us is the continuity and the width. We don't really want narrow high-grade veins. We want big hits of nice grade, and this is really, I think, what is key here. The fact that it's 3 grams and then quickly turns into 4 grams below surface is very appealing and puts it in stark contrast to some of the porphyry systems we see in the region. There are a few around this part of the world where the porphyries come to surface, and they are very big, but they tend to run about 1.1 gram per ton, which is, it seems juicy, but it's probably not quite there in this part of the world, but too big to walk away from. So those things can become a bit of a trap where we're now dealing with 3 and up to 4 grams over thick widths. That's a very different game. Basically you think, well, you only have to remove 1/3 of the rock to get the same gold. So your potential cost of mining is much, much lower. So this is, if it can be repeated, is a game changer. It's at surface. It's very, we would call this high grade for a near surface thing. And most importantly, it's thick. But what it is, of course, is still to be determined. One issue is that we, in hindsight, through no fault of Agnico, is that the drill pad was probably not in the best position. The hole was drilled to test the down dip extension of a very nice trenching anomaly, 8 meters to 20 grams off to the east. They didn't expect to hit gold from surface. So what we found, of course, is that the pad's on top of the damn thing, which is not really where you want it. You generally prefer to be outside drilling in rather than inside drilling out. So there's a lot of sort of pulling of hair, deciding where to move the rig to get better drilling angles. And that's not an easy thing to do here. It's, you need new permits, you need new pads, and then you've got to break the rig down and move it. That takes a week. It's not something you do on a whim. So a lot of effort's been put in to relocate rigs to better positions so that they can come in at better angles and better define what this thing is, what it is geologically, its size, its scope, its orientation, and that's probably the key thing. So over the last, I guess, month or so, the rigs have begun to focus from better angles. So hopefully in coming time, we'll be able to better explain exactly what's going on here. So going back to the wider area, so Pepas in the north, we can see 3 rigs running there. So that's very exciting, and hopefully new news flow will continue to come. There is 1 rig drilling just south of Pepino on, again, some geochemical targets. That isn't going so well, largely due to the lack of a camp. They tried to drill a hole there, having the crews walk in, and found that they were wasting too much time per day, and as a result, the drill costs were getting a bit out of hand. So that one's going to probably wind back for a month or so until a new camp can be built. So, very prospective, but logistically, that one was quite challenging. At the moment, most of the other geological teams are in the south at El Roble and El Cedro. We have worked there for the last probably 8 months. There have been numerous high-grade rock chips down there, plus 8 grams over quite wide areas. As we speak, there are a number of crews down there, and the geophysical IP crews that were working in the north have been down there for the last, I think, 2 or 3 months. So the IP work is going to continue there for another month or so. It's almost complete. and they have an expectation, or Agnico have an expectation, that they'll be able to begin drilling there, all going well, later this year. And obviously, looking at this map, which is geochemical sample points, the other projects such as La Virgencita is dependent upon approval of that application, which we hope to have done again by the end of the year. So we may or may not see drilling there, depending upon on how drilling goes. The JV, of course, much chatter today about what happens. We've just come to the end, or about to come to the end later tonight, of the first phase. First phase was 4 years, $10 million. Agnico and Newmont have informed us that they have exceeded this year's expenditure of $4 million. They're probably closer to 5.5. So they now have the right to exercise phase 2. They have not yet done so formally, but we are entirely comfortable that they will do so. They've certainly been talking about it with us for quite some time. It's just quite a complicated process. Phase 2 will, if it goes to completion, earn them an additional 14% to go to 65%. And that's 20 million over a maximum of 4 years. But I would be very surprised if it took 4 years. We've certainly been talking to them about budgets, and they'll probably knock it over in 2, because there's no value in them spending 4 years here. So they will be working this as hard and fast as they can get hold of rigs. The complication, however, is that it's actually quite a difficult, well, it requires a new JV structure to be created, and we need to be very careful about how we do that, because it involves the transfer and ownership of what is a major asset, and we want to make sure that, one, we don't get whacked with a huge tax bill as part of that process, and 2, that the ultimate structure we decide on is appropriate for whatever outcomes might occur in the next couple of years, be it buyouts or JVs or things. So it's getting it right at this time is most important, because once it's done, it's very hard to change. So lawyers and accountants and people above my pay grade have been working very hard for the last couple of months trying to determine how best to do this in a fairly complicated financial global environment. Tax laws have changed over the years around the world, so we just need to make sure that this is done correctly and we don't find ourselves bitten on the bum by something we didn't foresee down the line. Phase 3 is at the end of phase 2, and that's there is no money attached to that. That's whatever it costs for the JV partners to do a DFS. But from what we've seen at other projects in the area, that could be, well, if we look at Veridica, that was 300,000 metre drilling. That could be 60, 70, 80 million dollars, whatever it takes. So, but we're getting ahead. So in summary, I guess it's a very short presentation because it's only one significant hole today, but it's a damn good hole, and I think it gives me great comfort that one, Agnico and Newmont do know what they're doing. I mean, I might yell at them occasionally with their bureaucracy, but they are really top class geological teams. PEPAS was a long time coming in terms of mapping, sampling, geophysics. It wasn't just drill at random. And the fact that the first hole hit something of this magnitude gives me great comfort that we will find more of these things, which is ultimately what these guys want. They're not there for million ounces. These guys need, pick a number, but plus 5 million ounces. So the fact that they're there, the fact that they're taking it very seriously, would suggest to me that they see this as one of their best projects in the world, and certainly one that has the potential to host something of their scale, and that's large. The point I probably missed before is that once we exercise phase 2, there's a $2 million option payment to Orosur, which is nice. So there's a balance sheet. So that puts you in a strong position, a good project, major companies, money in the bank, and the other projects in Argentina and Brazil progressing slowly. What we do next, maybe new projects, but we might just take a few days to bed down phase 2 and then see what's out there. So any questions?
Okay, fantastic. Wow. So you put all the interesting stuff at the back end again, Brad. We don't really want to hear the history of the company. We want to hear where it's at today.
Well, you know it, Donald, but not everyone does. So.
Oh my, that second 10-15 minutes is quite electric, actually. So are you still at the negotiation phase on phase 2 with Agnico Newmont, or around that JV?
Look, we are. I mean, yes, the JV formally ends phase 1 tonight sometime. But that doesn't mean we need to go into phase 2 immediately. It is, as I said, there is a bit of wriggle room. By their actions and their words, they are moving forward. At last count, there were 160 people on site, 4 rigs, 50 cars. I mean, they're not going anywhere. They're bedded down for the long haul. So that's, by their action, would suggest that they're keen. We've looked at all the budgets, and they are making plans for 8-9 million next year. So that's all going ahead. As I said, it's just that process of making sure we get it right. Now, this is above my pay grade, but the structuring is not simple. The structure that was put in place with Minera Anza at the beginning is no longer really optimal because the environment in Colombia has changed, as they always do. So we just need to make sure that one, the transfer of the asset is done in a emotionally and financially painless way, and that what we end up with is the most flexible arrangement to allow all the options to work out. So I'm entirely comfortable that this is going to happen. It may not happen tomorrow, but certainly they're saying all the right things and doing all the right things. It's just a question of, I think, having 2 big companies with lots of people involved. It's a bit of herding of cats going on here. So we'll get there in the end, but it'll be a lot of talking yet.
And when might you expect that $2 million to happen?
Again, it's the JV says it comes in 30 days after exercising of phase 2. We're not in a rush, to be fair. We don't need the money. What we need to know is that it's coming. We got 3.2 in the bank at the moment. Our cash burn is very low intentionally. We've really held things to a very low level until this all became bedded down. You've
been very clever with your deals, haven't you?
Well, the deals, yes. Other deals were intentionally zero cost, entry cost, and very low cost for the first year, just for that reason, to protect ourselves in the event of it not going forward. So now we've come to what it is. So the 2 million will come in, when it comes in. We don't need the money. What we want to know is that it is coming in, and then we can relax. So we're all fairly happy, but there's lots of background chats going on with lawyers and accountants, and I'd bore you to death, but I try to ignore it all. Leave that to Louis.
Jeff Griffiths asks, so we've got questions from your shareholders here. In relation to phase 2 information, when will enough detail be released in order to satisfy the interest of institutional investors? So basically, Jeff is saying, can we get more details so that we get more institutional investors on and change the profile of the company a little bit, stabilize things a bit.
Those buggers are always hard to please, and the cheese is always being moved. We spoke to quite a few.
Institutional investors are hard to keep happy.
Well, we spoke to quite a few over the last few months, and the comments were, yes, when you get to phase 2, when you get the first drilling step house, come and talk. Okay, done that, so we'll begin to talk. Sadly, of course, the markets, the market have had a pretty rough 6 months in terms of risk of attitude and wars in Ukraine and various things. But I think we've now got a story to tell. We'll see the response. We really haven't been able to do anything for the last couple of months because we knew about this whole over 2 months ago. Not the details, but we knew in concept that it was exciting, which was nice to know. But it meant that we couldn't talk to anybody because we're basically we're locked up from conversation. So now that at last we're able to begin to talk, we'll begin the process of communicating with institutions, or at least those that play in this space. They look, this is what we are. This is the drill hole. This is the plan now for the next couple of years. This is who's doing it. So they can begin to see and project forward what's going to happen over the next 2 years. So
great. Now, let me ask, there's a multi-part question from Bhargav Joshi coming. Bhargav describes himself as a long-suffering shareholder. Perhaps he's slightly happier after today. And he and several others ask the same question. Have you resolved the data protocol issue with Agnico to release the updates on drill plan and assay results on a more frequent basis yet? And to be fair, that is probably the most overwhelming question that's been asked.
Yes, look, the answer is yes and no. I mean, most of the delays for this particular hole were not due to Agnico. They were due to data issues. Being the first hole in a new prospect, and then coming back with these ridiculous numbers, there was a bit of saying, well, okay, is this real? So they went back and re-assayed just to check, a different lab just to check. There were quite a few assays that were over the limit of 10 grams. They had to go back and be re-assayed. So there was 3 or 4 phases of re-assaying required to get to the point where this could be announced. So that was just technical. And the labs, sadly, in Peru are still stuffing around. So, I mean, yeah. So that wasn't them just being annoying. Yes and no. We certainly had some talks with them about that. We had our guys on site recently looking at everything, and we are going to be putting in place some slightly tighter protocols about when we go to site, probably on a monthly basis, look at the data, get data dumps. So we are going to get information on a more timely basis. So that's good.
Yeah,
whether
it's probably less important for Agnico and a lot more important for OMI.
Well, correct. So we will know more. Whether we can tell you, it depends upon whether that data is ready to announce in terms of compliance with 43-101. But you're correct. I mean, Agnico and Newmont would prefer we didn't talk because they don't really want this out there. And to them, this is not something they wanted to talk about. Well, to us, it's material. To them, it's annoying. So there is that slight sort of contrast in views about that. But ultimately, they recognise that we have an obligation to investors. We have an obligation to regulators, and we certainly will be pushing as hard as we can to make sure that this is done absolutely as in a timely fashion.
Okay, and this is going to be a final question, and it's the perennial question, everyone's favourite, as Bhargav describes it. When are you going to get more shares? When are the non-execs going to get shares? That whole thing.
Yeah, that all one. Look. I'm used to it. I don't quite know what they think I'm going to buy. I don't have millions, so I'm not going to make a difference to the share price. But the same answer always is, if I'm doing my job right, I can never buy a share because I always know what's going on. And I just made the comment. We knew about this hole over 2 months ago. Had I been less honest, I should have come in and bought some shares then. But we take a very firm view on what makes us offside, and almost every day we know what's going on. Yes. And
you're in a permanent close period.
Yeah, which is why you give directors options, because normally they can't trade for that exact reason. So look, as and when I can, I will, but really I think that maybe is getting a bit tired.
Okay, Brad, I have to thank you for your honesty. You're always straightforward and you tell us how it is. I think that whenever we speak, it's quite educational as well as informing the market. So thank you very much. It's terrific.